Well, good morning to you all. Um, I was going online and I saw this Steve Forbes, who I haven't heard from in I don't know in many years. I think the last time I've heard anything from Steve Forbes was back in the year 2000 when he was one of the Republicans running for president. Was it 1996 or was it in 2000? I no matter. No matter. What I do remember is that Steve Forbes ran for president one time. Probably not the worst of Republicans that could run for an office, but he's pretty bad. He's really, I mean, he's your typical um, free market obsessed economist type, and there's just too much of that in this country. Well, Steve Forbes claimed that Senator, well, you'll have to. I would recommend you watch the video, because he comments on Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, and what he has to say. Well, let's just say, there we go. Let's just say what he has to say. I have a comment about it, so hold tight.
Senator Kyrsten Sinema and Senator Joe Manchin are coming under fierce attack from the Democrat Party's far left for asking sensible, responsible questions about President Biden's blowout budget bill that would put in programs that would harm the economy now and into the future, devastating tax increases and the like. For acting so responsibly, they are under fierce attack. Senator Kyrsten Sinema can't even go to the restroom without being accosted by angry activists, which leads to a very basic question. Why don't those two Democrats leave the Democrat Party, since it's clear the Democrat Party has left them? There's plenty of precedent for this. Go back to Ronald Reagan. Our great president was once a Democrat, but as he pointed out, he became a Republican, not because he left the Democratic Party, the party left him. So too if Phil Gramm became a U.S. Senator, but as a congressman, he was a Democrat, helped Reagan get through his great economic program. He switched parties. And then he resigned from Congress and ran for re-election under the Republican label to get a new mandate. So Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, do the same thing. You may want to start out as independents and go to the Republican Party. It would be good for the Republicans, good for the nation, and ultimately good for the Democratic Party, because it would wake them up. The irresponsible left is doing them irreparable harm.
Da-dum-bum. Well, what do I got to say about that? Well, for starters, I would say that Steve Forbes might be what you would call probably probably a Mitch McConnell with a slightly more pleasant demeanor. Because all there is to Mitch McConnell is, "Oh, this Carl, oh, an asshole." Whereas Steve Forbes is, well, ta 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 ta. So that's basically, Steve Forbes acts like an elitist snot, and Mitch McConnell acts like a redneck. But they kind of remind me of each other, weirdly enough. But anyway, Steve Forbes claimed that Senator Kyrsten Sinema and Senator Joe Manchin, are under attack by the far left of the Democratic Party. Well, I want to do a little bit of clarification for Steve Forbes, because honestly, it's so obvious, but yet Americans seem to think otherwise. The Democratic Party is not far left. If anything, my problem with the Democratic Party is not far left enough. It's actually a political party that would be more aligned with conservative parties in other countries, other Western countries, on, well, fiscal matters. Maybe on social issues, they're going to be to the left. But on fiscal matters, monetary issues, they're going to be to the right of the Christian Democratic Union, let's say, in France. In Germany, or the Conservative Party in the UK, or the Union for Popular Majority in France. or the Popular Party in Spain. Again, I'm just giving you an example of the whole race of Tories in Canada. I'm just saying that most of the time, most of the conservative leaning parties around the world are slightly to the left of the Democrats here in the United States on economics, as a general rule. So, my problem with the Democratic Party, as I said, it's not far left enough. I'm also glad that and I want Steve Forbes to know this. I was glad when Kyrsten Sinema was being harassed by the students at Arizona State University. And I was, as I said, I'm for making Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin's life a living hell. I mean, it's not anything I would do. I mean, it's not anything, because it's not my nature to do that. But, for those who are doing it, I'm glad they're doing it. I am glad. Make them feel like shit, as far as I'm concerned, all the time. And the thing about it, Steve Forbes thinks that Build Back Better is radical when it's not radical at all. I mean, at best, this proposal is basically not even as generous as standard New Deal liberalism. It's at best lukewarm New Deal liberalism. It's barely liberal. It's barely progressive. Sure, it might be better than what Barack Obama or Bill Clinton offered in the past. I mean, as far as domestic spending programs and things of that nature. It is, but it's still not far enough, bold enough, far-reaching enough the way it needs to be. Now, Kyrsten Sinema getting harassed? Well, listen. $750,000 she took from Big Pharma. That's far worse. So, considering she took $750,000 in donations from Big Pharma when she was supposed to campaign as a progressive. For Christ's sake, she was a member of the Green Party back in the 1990s. And then now, I mean, she's buddy with Mitch McConnell. Really? I'm glad she wasn't able to take that shit in peace. I mean, I hope she had stomach pains while that student was following her in the bathroom. I hope she was having stomach pains, and having somebody making you're taking a shit and it being the most unpleasant thing, having a stomach pain, having somebody scream at you. Fucking base. I'm glad. I didn't stutter on purpose. But Steve Forbes, I mean, you hear, advising Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to lead the Democratic Party. Well, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. I want to make that clear. I used to be a Democrat. And I left the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party was not progressive enough. Bill Clinton turned me into a socialist. And not because Bill Clinton's policies were socialist. It was that the Democratic Party basically were allowed to be Reaganized after the 1984 election, which I may go into that in a minute. But, if they exit the Democratic Party, I'm talking about Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin exit the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party might be a better place. I want Steve Forbes to know that. Steve Forbes might be advised to not want that, but it would make the Democratic Party a better place. I mean, because right now, with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin being obstructionists to modest Democratic goals. This is not even like Bernie Sanders and the squad at their boldest. And they're not all that bold these days. This is basically, I mean, as I said, it's warmed over, lukewarm New Deal liberalism, which isn't all that liberal, what they're proposing. I mean, it doesn't go far enough. And I want to reiterate that. But you know what? With Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, they're basically, it's basically like Chuck Schumer is Senate Majority Leader in name only, in title only. Mitch McConnell, as far as I'm concerned, through the back door, is still the Senate Majority Leader. Their asshole is the one still calling the shots. I mean, it's really just, frustrating. And then he goes and invoked the name Ronald Reagan. Do you really need to go there, Mr. Forbes? Well, here's a little bit of news for you, Steve Forbes. Fuck Ronald Reagan. Fuck Ronald Reagan for for changing the national conversation and moving America away from the New Deal consensus that Democratic and Republican presidents alike were following as a successful economic model, especially after World War II. That was a successful model when you had the workforce with enough unionization that was there to create the middle class. And the unions, although were not as strong as I would like for them to have been, they were strong enough that it actually scared the shit out of non-union companies to go and get with the program and start to raise wages and start to give decent benefits for their workers. That's where our middle class came from. But I know the deal with people like Steve Forbes. He wants that middle class gone, and by golly, he's really gotten his way. And the Reagan consensus had destroyed the middle class in this country. For some reason, people, I run across some conservative Republican hack types. And if I say anything just even the least little bit critical of Ronald Reagan, they want to start a fight with me. But the thing about it is that Ronald Reagan, it took a George W. Bush for me to no longer declare Ronald Reagan as one of the worst presidents we ever had. But the thing about it is that Ronald Reagan did a whole lot to create the mess we're in right now with our economy. We have income inequality today. We went from 20-some% of the workforce unionized in the 1980s, which was low, and we're now down to less than 10% of the workforce. 6% of it belongs to the private sector, and the other 4% in the government sector. Unions almost do not exist in this country anymore, and this is why we are a first world country with a third world standard of living for a lot of people. We have increased income inequality. So and the thing about it is that the Democratic Party are spineless pieces of shit that after the 1984 election with Walter Mondale, who was a decent man, unfortunately defeated by Reagan in 84 through a landslide no less, the Democratic Party decided through groups like the Democratic Leadership Council to Reaganize the Democratic Party. And so the Democratic Party became Reaganized to the point where Democrats are actually always wanting to play patty cake with Republicans, and Republicans say, "You are divisive." Or when the the Democratic Party is like the battered housewife, and the Republican Party, and I'm not talking about your next door neighbor Democrat, your next door neighbor Republican. I'm talking about elected assholes. These people, the Republican Party is like the husband that beats up on the wife, and the Democratic Party is like the docile housewife being beaten up. So that's what's going on right there. And he talks about Senator Phil Gramm again, even more than Ronald Reagan. Fuck Phil Gramm. I remember that redneck piece of shit. And I can say redneck. I'm from the South. I'm a Southerner. Phil Gramm, who's never met a union-busting measure that he didn't like, or a tax plan that could benefit the rich, or corporately managed trade deals. Arrogant and stupid at the same time. arrogant and stupid. I remember that asshole. Fuck Phil Gramm. And he sit there and wanted to praise Phil Gramm. This is what I got to say about Phil Gramm. He was a piece of shit as a blue dog Democrat, and he remained a piece of shit as a Republican senator. Basically, I mean, he was a kind of, it was more in the modern era in the 1980s, but you got to understand people like Jesse Helms in North Carolina, who was the worst kind of Democrat. He was a Jim Crow Democrat, and worse than that, he was a Jim Crow Democrat that didn't even favor any vague New Deal liberalism. He basically had the shitty economics of people like Robert Taft, which is a juxtaposition because Republican Senator Robert Taft of Ohio was pro-racial equality. He was pro-civil rights. He sucked on economics, but he was good on race relations and racial equality. But people like Jesse Helms did not adopt that part of Robert Taft. He adopted the shitty aspect of Robert Taft, the anti-New Deal sentiment, the anti-unionism, that sort of thing. So, when we talk about the Southern strategy, some people deny there's such a thing as a Southern strategy. As the Republican Party became Southernized in the 60s, 70s, and by the 1980s, it was firmly in Republican hands. People like Jesse Helms and people like Phil Gramm were both the embodiment of that progression, or shall I say regression, of being a Democrat turning into a Republican. In some ways, those Dixiecrats that were Jim Crow Democrats turning into today's Republicans make them worse, because not only did they parted ways from the Democratic Party for the wrong reasons, they embraced what was bad about the Republicans once they got in there. So in a lot of ways, they're worse than yesterday's Dixiecrats. But I digress. And basically what I'm saying is that, if they follow Steve Forbes' advice, I'm talking about Joe Manchin, who's a piece of shit, and that cackling Karen from Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema, they want to go and leave the Democratic Party, I say let them do it. Let them do it. Because, you don't need them. If they're gonna be Democrats and vote the way Mitch McConnell wants them to vote, then just go ahead and tell them get the fuck out. We don't need you. So anyway, I'm just kind of going off on a tangent today. It's not a tangent. It's just something I run across, and as I said, I just am tired of these blue dogs. I mean, there are other Democrats out there. They're almost as bad as Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but it's pretty shitty, as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any use for these kind of turncoat Democrats. I really don't, because they are basically an obstacle to progress as far as I'm concerned. Well, if you like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree with what I have to say, comment anyway. We will have a conversation. I'm sorry. We will have a conversation. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we are, in fact, the muckrakers of our time. Feel free to share the content of this channel and go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell. And until next time, I am American Social Democracy. Class struggle now. And Keep the faith. Keep it going. Until next time. Good night.